7 words. That was all it took to detonate a dynasty. It is final. And when those words were spoken in front of Buckingham Palace on February 17th, 2026, the fairy tale didn't just end. It was erased, audited, sealed, and archived under sovereign authority. This wasn't a divorce. It was a controlled implosion of the most controversial royal marriage of the modern era. And buried beneath the polished statements and press suits was something far more explosive. A 94-page settlement, a secret prenuptial time bomb, a collapsing California empire, and whispers of Prince Andrew lurking in back-channel shadows. But to understand how the monarchy reached the point of no return, you have to go back to a freezing early morning inside Windsor Castle, February 3rd. While Britain slept, Princess Anne walked into an emergency session carrying what insiders now call the Marl withdrawal file. 3 words stamped across it: immediate custodial breach. Not marital dispute, not separation tension. Custodial breach that the document was clinical, ruthless in detail. Archie, 7. Lilibet, 5. Withdrawn from their California schools without notice to royal child welfare officers. Scheduled medical appointments blocked. Communication lines cut. A $6.3 million education trust dissolved. Not mismanaged, dissolved. Princess Anne reportedly described it as a structured pattern of disengagement, not chaos. Strategy.ask yourself, why would the oldest legal mechanisms of the British Crown be reactivated for what the public had been told was just a modern couple living privately overseas? Because within 24 hours, the Royal Emergency Guardianship Protocol was activated, a clause dormant since post-war instability, the kind of clause nations don't touch unless they believe something existential is at stake. And then came the move that changed everything. Appendix 4 of the Royal Succession Stabilization Act, a clause dating back to abdication crisis precedent. Full custodial control over minors of royal descent in the event of identity erasure or existential threat. The wording alone was chilling that Meghan filed no immediate objection, no dramatic counter, no televised statement. Silence. Palace insiders later said that silence was interpreted as compliance or calculation, that by February 15th, the settlement was signed inside the Royal Family Court of Chancery. 94 pages, 6 annexes, a dual-frame instrument blending domestic civil law with crown fiduciary protection. The last comparable legal construct dated back to an abdication crisis. The settlement carved through everything: joint assets, Montecito, Norfolk Holdings, Arcuel liabilities, custody, permanent legal guardianship to the crown, financial support structures, property delineation, transitional housing, and then the clauses that froze the oxygen out of the Sussex brand, non-disparagement, media engagement bans, global confidentiality enforcement, but buried deep inside was Clause 14C, media exploitation and identity licensing, irreversible, global. It forbade the monetized use of Archie or Lilibet's likeness, not just photos, but voice renderings, dramatizations, animations, even AI simulations, without written clearance from the Office of Royal Protections. And that's where the fracture became visible. Sources confirmed Meghan resisted signing 14C immediately, not because she rejected protecting her children, but because future brand integration rights had allegedly already been sketched out. Concept art, development outlines, a children's series tentatively titled Lily and the Lighthouse. Lilibet's image positioned as soft-focused legacy branding that former Crown legal advisors reportedly said the clause wasn't about blocking profit. It was about blocking commodification trauma. The monarchy, scarred by history, wasn't about to watch royal children become intellectual property. And then the midnight bomb dropped at page 14, clause 7. When fragments of the sealed prenuptial agreement were unsealed during confidential inquiry, legal circles froze. Clause 7, drafted in 2018 by a US-based firm, granted Meghan sole intellectual property control over Harry's likeness, voice, unpublished material, and narrative derivatives from 2016 onward, including the Sussex departure from royal duties. Think about the magnitude of that. Every memoir passage, every interview, every documentary frame, every podcast recording, filtered, licensed, controlled. What the world thought was a joint brand may have legally been a one gatekeeper operation. Harry had, according to insiders, signed away narrative sovereignty. And here's the part that detonated palace corridors. Senior royals were allegedly never fully briefed on the clause before before the wedding ceremony. Had they known, insiders say, recognition proceedings might have stalled, then Prince Andrew's name surfaced in internal communications. Alleged back-channel contact between Meghan's legal team and associates tied to Andrew. Strategic discussions about limiting the Crown's ability to reclaim Harry's narrative. Andrew, already isolated within the institution, reportedly offered informal intelligence about legal vulnerabilities. In return, alleged promises of narrative rehabilitation. A reframing that the palace has not publicly confirmed those communications. But internal investigative supplements were reportedly filed that meanwhile, in California, the financial scaffolding was collapsing, that certified filings in Santa Barbara County revealed Montecito was edging toward foreclosure. A $9.4 million bridge loan structured through a Delaware holding entity. 14.25% interest. 9-month maturity. 0 rollover flexibility. Payment missed. Refinancing attempts through Manhattan lenders specializing in distressed celebrity portfolios reportedly collapsed after underwriters flagged inconsistencies in Arkell's audited expense allocations. PR retainers and security reimbursements categorized as charitable awareness spending. By the 5-project pipeline once valued above $40 million evaporated. Network memo language was blunt, inadequate audience retention, and reputational drag, and the settlement compounded the damage. Prior subsidies since 2020 were reclassified as institutional expenditures subject to review. Security costs, renovations, legal deferrals, repayment frameworks activated that Harry, according to those who saw him during this period, appeared hollow, withdrawn. He reportedly reopened quiet communication with Prince Edward, not as a prince negotiating power, but as a brother trying to understand whether his children still legally counted as Windsor. That question alone tells you how far this had fallen. By February 19th, another leak changed the emotional temperature entirely. A clause titled Contingent Custodial Jurisdiction. It confirmed the children were no longer registered within official genealogical rolls pending jurisdictional review. Documentation inconsistencies. Travel authorization anomalies. Biometric verifications flagged. The addendum issued on February 20th formalized removal from ceremonial references under sovereign protocol. At 11:59 p.m., the royal genealogy page updated. The names were gone. Replaced with a footnote referencing protocol jurisdiction. For Meghan, this was narrative annihilation. Years of positioning as architect of a modern royal lineage collapsed overnight. And through it all, Catherine appeared publicly at a pediatric center visit wearing a subtle shield-shaped brooch. Observers identified it within hours, symbolic alignment with the invoked protection protocol. When asked about the children's well-being, she answered carefully, every child deserves stability and care free from exploitation. Meanwhile, Harry attempted to void Clause 7 in California court. Declaratory relief for narrative reclamation. The judge's response was blunt. He signed repeatedly and benefited from it until it no longer suited him. But in private communications later shared anonymously, Harry allegedly admitted he did not fully grasp the scope when signing in 2018. He was grieving, in love, he trusted, and by the time he understood, the infrastructure had already been built around him. Documentaries, podcasts, branded confessionals, all legally gated. He was present in every frame, absent from every decision. And the Andrew threads? Still under review. On February 17th, when William stood flanked by Anne and Sophie and delivered that 4-minute announcement, it was more than institutional messaging. It was a reclaiming operation. Inside the signing room on February 15th, when Harry initialed the paragraph relinquishing primary decision-making authority over education, health, and residence, he reportedly muttered 4 words that now echo through this entire saga. If this spares them, I'll vanish myself. Those words are not in the settlement, but they define it that those 4 words didn't just close a chapter, they exposed the cost of everything that came before. Because once Harry signed, once the ink dried on those 94 pages, the machinery of the crown didn't celebrate. It fortified. The firewall went up, and behind palace walls, the cleanup operation began. The public saw a statement. The institution saw a near-decade containment crisis finally neutralized. Within 48 hours of the settlement being sealed, internal memorandums reportedly circulated across Clarence House, Kensington Palace, and Sandringham archives. Code references, protocol cross-checks, contingency reviews. This wasn't revenge, it was consolidation. The monarchy had allowed the Sussex experiment to unfold for years under the banner of modern flexibility. Now it was recalibrating under the banner of structural preservation. The clause now being quietly called the narrative freeze, Section 12A, was perhaps the most suffocating of them all. It didn't just restrict interviews, it froze memory itself. No memoir chapters referencing the children's births. No documentary reenactment reenactments of christenings, no podcast confessions about family holidays, nothing without palace clearance. Not for Harry, not for Meghan, not for anyone speaking on their behalf that an unreleased audio memoir project tentatively titled Mother of Grace, reportedly containing intimate reflections about Lilibet's birth and Meghan's framing of Martin royal motherhood, was shelved indefinitely. Streaming executives, already bruised from declining performance metrics, weren't about to wade into a legal minefield with sovereign enforcement teeth. And those teeth were real. Appendix 4 of the settlement required biometric image registration for both children under secured vault conditions at Sandringham Archives, a protective measure against AI likeness replication and unauthorized image resale. Sources whispered that credible intelligence had surfaced suggesting unreleased childhood images were circulating in quiet Hollywood licensing inquiries. Whether that was ever completed remains unclear. What is clear is that the palace moved as if it were. Meanwhile, Archewell faced new disclosure obligations. For years, critics had questioned the financial architecture of the foundation. Now, with reclassification reviews underway, audited expense allocations were under microscopic scrutiny. Public relations retainers, security reimbursements, production development overhead categorized as awareness initiatives. If even a fraction of those structures were deemed misaligned with charitable compliance thresholds, the reputational fallout would be merciless. And then there was Andrew. If Harry's narrative loss was tragic, Andrew's alleged involvement was radioactive. Internal supplementary files reportedly detailed communications between individuals in Meghan's advisory orbit and figures previously connected to Andrew's network. Not formal meetings, not documented strategy sessions, but advisory conversations, legal vulnerability assessments, strategic optics, discussions about how to legally limit the Crown's narrative reach over Harry's identity. For Andrew, already stripped of public duties, this was the final fracture. The palace response was swift. Residual institutional access reduced. Informal advisory channels severed. Any lingering possibility of reputational rehabilitation through association with an alternative media platform evaporated overnight. Princess Anne's reaction, according to those present, was ice-cold stillness. The kind of silence that precedes structural decisions, not emotional retaliation. Structural correction. Outside palace walls, the public reaction was brutal. Ipsos polling data in the days following the settlement indicated overwhelming support for removal of Sussex royal affiliation. Sympathy for Harry remained fragmented, a complicated blend of pity and frustration. Meghan's brand, however, was hemorrhaging credibility in real time that social media turned savage. Hashtags like Not Royals trended across Europe and North America. The February 18th lifestyle video, candles, muted lighting, a monologue about the burden of silence, was dissected frame by frame. Critics accused her of aestheticizing victimhood, while legal documents painted a far less flattering portrait. But what made this collapse different from past royal scandals was that it wasn't driven by tabloids. It was driven by legal text. 94 pages, 6 annexes, sovereign enforcement clauses that inside California, Montecito sat under quiet financial strain. Neighbors whispered about refinancing attempts that never materialized. The Delaware holding entity tied to the bridge loan was reportedly dissolving. Without rollover flexibility, foreclosure chatter intensified. And Harry? Those close to him described a man caught between relief and erasure. Relief that the children's immediate instability was resolved. Erasure because the cost of that resolution included narrative silence. Clause 7 remained intact. His attempt to void it failed. Legally, the story of his adult life remained licensed through the very contract he now regretted. He had tried to reclaim authorship. The court reminded him that authorship had been negotiated away years earlier in quiet private messages that later reached investigative journalists under anonymity safeguards. Harry allegedly described feeling like a figurehead in my own biography, present at every shoot, interviewed in every special, but rarely holding the final cut authority. If true, that admission reframes years of public appearances not as joint confessionals, but as curated outputs. The Crown, slow-moving but relentless, ultimately concluded that the children were at the epicenter of that imbalance, which brings us back to that image of Catherine leaving St. George's Chapel with Lilibet and Charlotte days earlier. No grand speech, no press conference, just a photograph, hand in hand. Silent symbolism. In a media war saturated with interviews and streaming deals, the monarchy countered with restraint. The February 17th announcement was deliberately brief, less than 4 minutes. No emotional language, no personal accusations, just institutional clarity. The marriage agreement is official. The settlement reflects ancient duty. It is final. Those words weren't theatrical. They were surgical. That the world will keep watching. Legal threads are still being pulled. hold. Andrew's alleged communications remain under review. Financial disclosures may yet surface. Reinvention attempts will undoubtedly follow. But one thing is no longer ambiguous. It is final.